Here's the first section of your script, keeping it sharp, immersive, and to the point. The Zalari had watched humanity for centuries, their council convening with meticulous care to assess the civilizations of the cosmos. Their conclusions about Earth were unanimous. Humans were unremarkable, primitive, fragile, emotionally driven. They created art, composed poetry, and spoke of love and unity. Their history, while marred by conflict, showed a steady march toward diplomacy. To the Zalari, war was a relic of lesser species. They had long since outgrown such barbaric struggles, achieving peace through intellect and cooperation. War was an aberration, a failure of progress. And humans? They were nothing more than an anomaly, beings who, by sheer fortune, had not yet been eradicated by a greater force. So when the first official diplomatic summit between humanity and the Zalari was convened, the latter spoke with quiet amusement. They expressed their willingness to accept humans into the interstellar fold, offering guidance, protection even, should they require it. Aboard the pristine halls of the Zalari capital ship, the human delegation listened with composed patience. Scientists, politicians, and ambassadors nodded along, careful with their words. They understood the value of these talks. Peace was preferable, always preferable. At the back of the room, silent and still, stood a Marine. He wasn't there to negotiate. He wasn't there to offer treaties or speak on behalf of humanity's brightest minds. He was there for security, an unspoken necessity, a relic of old instincts that still lingered despite Earth's newfound peace. But when the Zalari Prime casually stated, with serene confidence, that humans had likely survived due to alliances or luck, the Marine chuckled, a low, knowing sound that broke through the otherwise formal atmosphere. All eyes turned to him. The Zalari's luminous gaze flickered with curiosity. The human diplomat stiffened, prepared to intervene if needed, but the Marine simply leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "You think we're harmless?" he said, voice calm, measured. "You have no idea what we survived." The Zalari tilted their heads in unison, their shimmering robes flowing as they exchanged glances. One of them, a high-ranking scholar, spoke with the tone of a patient teacher. "It is no insult, human. We mean only that your people have shown little evidence of true military capability, not compared to the war-forged species of the void." The Marine exhaled, his gaze sweeping across the chamber. He saw nothing but confidence in their alien faces. A species so certain of their own understanding, so certain of their conclusions, they had no idea. He straightened, stepping forward, his boots echoing against the polished floor. "You look at us and see artists, philosophers. You see compassion, diplomacy, restraint. And you think that's all we are." He shook his head. "That's the mistake every predator on our planet made." The Zalari listened, some amused, some intrigued. The Marine continued. "We weren't born with claws. No fangs, no natural armor. We weren't the fastest, the strongest, or the biggest. We should have died out." His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "But we didn't." He took another step, voice steady. "We fought. We adapted. We learned to outthink the things that hunted us. We became something else, something worse." A flicker of doubt passed through the Zalari ranks, but it was brief. Their leader, ever composed, spoke again. "That may be true for your past, but your species has evolved beyond such primitive instincts. Have you not? You have abandoned war just as we have." The Marine's gaze darkened. "We didn't abandon it." His voice dropped lower, forcing them to listen closely. "We mastered it." Silence. A stillness settled over the chamber, the weight of the words sinking in. The Zalari, for the first time in centuries, hesitated. "You think war is primitive," the Marine said, rolling his shoulders, voice measured but sharp. "You think it's something lesser beings do when they don't know better, when they haven't learned to be civilized." He let the words hang in the air. "That's where you're wrong." The Zalari delegation listened, some with polite patience, others with quiet skepticism. They were old, their civilization ancient and wise. War was a concept they had studied, observed from afar, dismissed as a lower form of conflict resolution. They saw it in the younger races, the ones who had yet to evolve beyond their baser instincts. They saw it in the mistakes of fallen empires, those who relied on violence instead of intellect. But none of them had ever seen war through human eyes. We didn't survive because we were the strongest, the Marine continued, or the fastest. We survived because we refused to die, because we looked at the things trying to kill us and found ways to kill them first. He stepped forward, gaze sweeping the room. You call yourselves enlightened because you moved past war. We call ourselves alive because we didn't. A low murmur rippled through the Zalari. Their leader, ever composed, tilted his head. And yet your species pursues peace now. Is that not an admission that war is an obsolete tool? The Marine exhaled, slow and steady. Peace is a choice, he said. A deliberate one. But it's not the absence of war. It's knowing what war costs and deciding not to pay that price until we have to. He studied the faces before him, waiting, watching. Some of them had begun to understand. Some still clung to their assumptions. You think war is just destruction, he said, voice quieter now but heavier. That it's just chaos, blood, and fire. You don't understand the kind of war we wage. His hands tightened at his sides. We fought each other for thousands of years. We learned how to break armies, how to outthink enemies who looked just like us, who spoke our language, who knew every trick we did. We built machines that could wipe out entire cities, that could burn the sky itself. And we didn't stop there. He let that sink in before he continued. You think war is just about strength, about who has the bigger guns, the faster ships, the sharper blades. But real war, the kind humans fight, it's about will, about endurance, about who's willing to go one step further than the other guy, about who's willing to suffer more. The room was deathly quiet. The Marine's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. You've never fought a species that will break its own bones just to keep going, that will chew through its own pain, crawl through fire, claw its way through hell itself if it means winning. He looked at them, at the carefully composed expressions that were beginning to crack. You don't understand war because you've never had to fight someone like us. One of the Zalari scholars spoke then, his voice hesitant. If this is true, then why is your history filled with art, with music, with kindness? If you are as dangerous as you claim, why do you build instead of destroy? The Marine gave a small, grim smile. Because we know what we're capable of, he said, and we don't want to be that all the time. A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. But, he added, just because we choose not to be monsters doesn't mean we don't remember how. You misunderstand something fundamental about us, the Marine said, his voice quieter now, but carrying an undeniable weight. You think because we're capable of peace, it means we fear war, that we shy away from it. He shook his head. That's not it at all. The Zalari delegation watched him with growing unease. The confidence they had held at the beginning of these talks was beginning to crack, subtle but noticeable. We don't avoid war because we're afraid of it, he continued. We avoid it because we know exactly what it costs. We know what it does to people, what it turns them into. He exhaled, slow and steady. You've never seen what we become when the gloves come off. The Zalari Prime kept his voice measured. Are you suggesting that your people would resort to barbarism in the face of conflict? The Marine's expression didn't change. Barbarism? He repeated, almost amused. No, we don't lose control. That's what makes us different. That's what makes us dangerous. He took a slow step forward, the quiet sound of his boots against the floor, the only noise in the chamber. We don't rage. We don't lash out. We don't fight for the sake of fighting. We calculate. We analyze. We figure out exactly what will take to end the fight, and then we do it. His eyes locked onto the Zalari Primes. You think war is passion. For us, war is precision. A silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. You assume we avoid war because we can't handle it. The truth is, we avoid war because when we fight, we don't stop until we've won. One of the Zalari advisors, a high-ranking strategist, finally spoke, his voice laced with skepticism. And yet, your world still stands. Your history shows restraint. You have not conquered. You have not destroyed entire civilizations. If what you say is true, why have you not carved out an empire through the stars? The Marines gazed in waver. Because we don't want to. That answer seemed to unnerve them more than anything else he had said. We don't seek war. We don't hunger for power. We don't need to prove ourselves through conquest. His expression darkened. But don't mistake that for weakness. We fight when we have to. And when we do, we don't play by the rules other species do. The strategist frowned. What do you mean? The Marine let a small, grim smile tug at the corner of his mouth. You fight wars like it's a contest. Like there are boundaries, limits. Like there's a point where it stops. His voice was quiet, lethal. We fight wars like it's the end of the world. Because for us, it always has been. A flicker of discomfort passed through the Zalari ranks. When we go to war, we don't stop at the battlefield. The Marine continued. We don't just target soldiers. We don't just fight armies. We dismantle everything. Supply lines, infrastructure, morale. We don't just aim to win. We aim to make sure you can never fight us again. He let that sit for a moment. Let them truly absorb what he was saying. You think because you have technology, because you've seen war before, that you understand what it means. But you've never fought a species that treats war like a problem to be solved. That doesn't fight for glory or honor or territory, but fights because losing is unacceptable. His eyes swept over them, cold and calculating. You've never fought humans. The silence stretched long and heavy. The Marine let it sit, let them feel the weight of everything he had said. Some of them still didn't understand. Some of them refused to. But the ones who did, he could see it in their eyes, the growing unease, the quiet recognition of a mistake they hadn't even realized they had made. The Zalari Prime spoke first, his voice measured but quieter now. And yet, despite all of this, you expect us to believe that humanity desires peace? The Marine exhaled through his nose. No, he said, I expect you to understand that we choose peace. Every day, because we know the alternative. He glanced around the room. You assume our history of war makes us reckless. It doesn't. It makes us cautious. We've seen what happens when we let conflict spiral. We've seen the ruins left behind. We've seen the cost. His jaw tightened. And we've paid it. One of the Zalari scholars leaned forward, hands clasped. You claim that humans do not seek conquest, that you fight only when necessary. But if pushed, if cornered, you're saying your kind will become monsters. The Marine shook his head. No. He looked the scholar dead in the eyes. Monsters are reckless, uncontrolled. We don't become monsters. His voice was low, steady. We become something worse. The tension in the room sharpened. You fought wars with rules, he continued. With limits. With the belief that there's a point where both sides can step back and call it over. He tilted his head slightly. That's not how we fight. Because we've had wars where losing meant extinction, where surrender was an option, where the only way to survive was to make sure the other side didn't. The Zalari Prime's expression was unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders was new. And yet, you claim that your kind is not a threat. The Marine let out a slow breath. We're not. Not unless you make us one. His gaze swept the room. You've seen species that thrive on war, that burn themselves out in conquest. We're not like them. We don't fight for expansion. We don't fight for resources. We fight because we have to. And when we do, we don't leave anything to chance. The room was silent. You assumed we were harmless, he said, voice calm. Because we talk about diplomacy. Because we build instead of destroy. Because we don't start wars. He let a small, grim smile cross his face. That was your first mistake. One of the younger Zalari, a military analyst, finally spoke. And if we chose war? His voice was quiet. The Marine turned his gaze on him, unreadable. Then you'd learn exactly how wrong you were. The Zalari Prime studied him for a long moment. And if we choose peace? The Marine nodded once. Then you'll never have to find out. The silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It wasn't skepticism. It wasn't dismissal. It was understanding.